Hello, everybody. This is Noah and John, and we are with Urban Digs. And today, Johnny, we are talking Manhattan, and we got a very good one today. We got Shaun Osher. He was a brilliant broker before he founded Core, way back when, almost 20 years ago now, Shaun. You're a veteran of this industry now.
Yes, I guess I am.
Whether or not you like it or not, you are.
I think if you survive 2 years in the industry, you're a veteran. That's
Yeah,
true.
you're a super veteran. You're a super veteran, uber veteran. You've done so many projects with your company. This beautiful boutique company. You've done over 50 projects, over $10 billion in sales. You're consistently a top, and I'm saying top, like top one. You're in the top of production out there. You know everything about this industry. So I thank you for being with us for a little time today to share what's going on. And I'm going to start right off the bat. Shaun, it's crazy out there. What is going on in your mind in the New York City markets?
I mean, the New York City market has actually been incredibly strong, very resilient. We just got our third quarter results out in all of the markets. I'm sure you know more than anyone. It will show that New York City was actually had one of the strongest quarters in history, which is something that's very different to what's going on in the rest of the United States. When I speak to other agents all the way, across the country to California, they're saying, the first thing they say is, oh, I hope this market gets better. And, things are very difficult and prices are coming down and it's hard to sell anything. New York's been the exact opposite. So the market is incredibly resilient and been very strong.
Right. And let me ask, I mean, we just had an election that's sort of in the past now. And one of the things, and first of all, I recommend everybody to, check out Shaun's page on LinkedIn. He's got a blog, Padco's. It's awesome stuff. And I don't know how often you publish it, Shaun, but there's really some nice nuggets in there. And one of the things you wrote recently is about, just kind of trying to keep calm. There's always that sense of worry about clients or worrying about the elections in the market. How do you keep them calm and, keep them focused on the bigger picture, given the state of the market today?
I think, going back to what Noah said, I mean, experience kind of brings wisdom just by the nature of the beast. I think if you do something long enough, you see markets and cycles and you kind of learn to deal with things from a different perspective. I write podcasts once a week religiously. Every Friday, I put it out. I've been doing it now for about 3 years. It's built quite a following. I get good. It's my kind of cathartic way of just expressing what's on my mind. So thanks for the plug. I appreciate it.
It's
And
good. I
yeah,
like it.
glad you enjoy it.
Shaun, before we go to the next question, I just want to stick on the state of the market just for 2 seconds more. Are you seeing any difference with the luxury market, the super luxury market? Are sellers easily turning over property, or are there pockets of distress? Is there just a little color we can get on
I
that
mean, I
sector?
think I think we've seen strength throughout the entire range of the market. I mean, New York City is really kind of like a luxury market as an overall market, and which is what we focus on. And I would categorize that really as anything over, say, $1 million. That's been incredibly strong. Definitely rates falling, and I think today the Fed will probably lower rates again, which will in turn affect mortgage rates over the long term. And I think that'll spur new activity in the sub $2 million range, which has been incredibly resilient and strong. But also the Uber market, there have been more $50 million deals, I think, in the quarter than in history. So, I think we're just in New York City seeing incredible strength throughout the market. And, I would say it's the golden rule. If you have something that's sitting on the market, it's either overpriced or there's something fundamentally wrong with the real estate. But, we have a lack of inventory and a surge in demand. And if something's not selling, it's either overpriced or, there's something a little funky with the unit where you have to make an adaptation.
So I'd like to dig into that because I think it's a brilliant point. And one of the things that we like to focus on UrbanDigs a lot is we talk about overpricing, underpricing, and we like to look at that because it's an easier thing to look at. But when you talk about something that's fundamentally wrong, I mean, obviously there's some clear things about things that are fundamentally wrong. But one of the things that you've written about are some of the demographic shifts. And I'm curious, when you look at some of the demographic shifts and you look at some of the features that are sort of popular now versus popular then, how much of the sort of what's sitting on the market can kind of be attributed to sort of people just don't want that anymore. They want what's next. And if you could talk about what that is as well,
Well,
too.
everyone kind of wants the shiny new penny, which in our market means new development. And new development is a kind of different segment of the market and always sells for a premium because it's newer product, which means it's new and improved. And I'm generalizing here. There is definitely product and projects on the market that I wonder what they were thinking when they designed them and built them. But for the most part, there are projects that are selling, and they will sell at a premium to the apartment across the street in an older building with less amenities, different types of finishes, different layouts. The interesting thing about real estate, just like, looking at it from a macro standpoint, it's constantly changing because we are constantly changing. We don't live our lives the same way we did in 1920 or 1940 or 1960 or 1980 or 2000. It's 24 years since, the turn of the century. And I think our lives have changed dramatically. And the real estate that's changed with it is selling at a premium. And I mean, it's that simple.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
if you want me to give up my fax machine, Shaun, I'm not going to do it.
You can telegram me later.
I mean,
honestly, I remember as a kid, I used to get telegrams, and my wife said to me, "Are you kidding me? Like, what even is a telegram?" But yeah, that just shows how much technology and everything has changed just in our lifetimes.
is that like someone on a bike just like delivering a note?
Almost, yeah. It's a personal messenger with a certain, you paid per letter. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Shaun, what does the future new development home look like? And I mean, that's one question I want to look at. And also, I mean, are developers starting to come back at all? I mean, I haven't looked at the data, but I get a feeling that permits and all that kind of stuff, it's still at a relatively low level.
Well, because developers for the most part are not pro bono. They some of them love what they do, but most of them do it for the money. And it's very difficult for a developer now to pencil out a project with land costs, construction costs. Financing is almost impossible to get. So, there's not many developers in New York City developing. A lot of them have gone to other markets where it's a lot more developer friendly. Land prices are much lower. Construction costs are maybe more flexible. It's very difficult to develop something in New York City and make a profit. The amount of risk and capital that's needed is prohibitive to most everyone. So with that said, there isn't a huge pipeline. And that's only going to exacerbate the problem that we have, which is we're in a housing crisis, nationally, and we're definitely in a housing crisis locally. There's not enough good product on the market for people to buy. And I don't see it getting built anytime soon.
Yeah, let's pivot to that. Let's pivot to that. I mean, what policies, what can be done about housing affordability, I mean, across the price spectrum?
I mean, as I wrote in podcast, shameless blog last week, I think the one thing that both candidates kind of agreed on, and maybe the only thing, is that we have a housing crisis, and they both wanted to address that. The reality is, a president doesn't really have the ability to change that on the local level. It's more of like the local administration, the NIMBYism and YIMBY, it's kind of that needs to be addressed locally. So I think that, in order for our cities to get better, we need to solve this housing crisis because it's such a huge part of the integration of our society and our cities. And I think, the local administration, I mean, that's where it sits, and we need smart people who are creative, who will bring solutions across the board to every segment of the housing market.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement here. I think that's exactly what's needed. And I think, it's interesting. I've had a number of conversations with folks on the commercial side, sort of the multifamily, and they're starting to get some investors sniffing around because they realize the prices have really sort of reset to this new lower level. And it's not that they're attractive, but I'm just going to put this in sort of a macro perspective, the paper cuts that you're going to take to bleed out capital until maybe one or two of these regulations on a local level get changed may at some point become worth it. And I'm wondering if that's something that you're seeing on your end, maybe turn those around.
Well, I think the hugest impact on the residential market from the commercial segment was this big conversation where commercial buildings were able to be converted into residential. That was a big conversation. In reality, most of these buildings are not conducive to a residential conversion. That's not as easy as a lot of these buildings were built. They've got huge floor plates. They're inefficient. They're old. Most of them would be better off just being torn down and building a new tower. But again, that goes to local zoning laws, which need to be changed. And people need to get with the program and be a little bit more forward thinking and flexible in their, thought process about, being so tight on zoning, et cetera, et cetera. But, I think the commercial markets got hit so hard, and a lot of that money has been wiped out. And so now there's been a reset. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. But there's so much opportunity in the city to kind of develop the right kind of residential. Just the zoning kind of doesn't allow it now, or the opportunity on the sites don't allow it. So I think that's the big challenge. I don't know if that answered your question, but
well, I feel like
yeah.
it did. I feel like the rent regulations of 2019 are playing a direct role with the investors. If you could say that there's an investor pool out there that is interested in putting money to work at New York City real estate, the rent regulations of 2019 hindered that significantly.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think the thing about New York City, unlike other cities like, let's say, Miami has always been a hugely speculative market up until recently, right? Where now I feel like Miami is much more of a primary residence market and less speculative. But New York City has never really been a speculative market. Even if it's a second or a third residence, we don't have investors coming here to buy an apartment to get a return on their investment, because that's never penciled out. What we are seeing, though, is a lot of international money coming into New York City to buy real estate as a safe haven and a diversification of their overall portfolio, because it's a very sound investment. They may not be getting like a return immediately, but I think that's the money we're seeing. And to your point, the rental market directly affects the condo market and the co-op market and vice versa. So those two are very interconnected. And that rent versus buy calculation is always a very important one to see how they're interacting and what makes more sense, to rent or to buy. And that there are a lot of layers that go into that. There's the taxes, there's interest rates. It's a pretty deep market to analyze.
Right. And so I'd like to pivot on that point a little bit, because I think one of the things that, again, Patco's plug, I read about it, and I don't remember when it was you posted this, but one of the things you talked about is this local expertise sort of over, national rankings. And I think everything you're speaking about in the last several minutes has been sort of just a great plug for local expertise and why it helps to sort of understand that local market. And I'm wondering if you could dig into a little bit to that for us.
Yeah, I mean, real estate is a local business. It's a service industry, service industry. But you hire a broker because of their expertise ultimately. Some people are hiring brokers for other reasons, and generally they're not happy with the results. But if you hire a broker who actually takes this business seriously, is well educated, and can provide a very deep understanding and intuition about the market, that's invaluable. So it's very difficult to understand markets on scale. I still show apartments. I still look at apartments. I speak to buyers. I speak to sellers. I speak to brokers. If I didn't, I wouldn't know what's going on. Reports and spreadsheets are one thing, and they tell trailing, story about trailing data. But to understand where the market currently is and where it's moving, you really need to be in communication with homeowners, buyers, on a daily basis. And the brokers are the most valuable source of information, because they're speaking to buyers and sellers, and it's hyper local. That's why I always raise my eyebrow if someone's a specialist in Miami, New York, Texas, and Los Angeles. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'd love to know how they do it, because just New York City alone is such a complex market, neighborhood to neighborhood. I think it's, very important to kind of understand your local niche and to kind of bring that expert evaluation to your clients.
Shaun, you said that masterfully. You're preaching to the choir over here. We are in the agent intelligence business. We like to think the real AI is agent intelligence. Nobody wants anything artificial, and the human element cannot be fully replaced. And consumers out there just want educated market expertise, unbiased, independent, good old-fashioned advisory services. So, I mean, thank you for eloquently pointing that out. And I just want to pivot that to this question over here. You've been in business for over 30 years. You've been running your company for over 20 years. I'm sure you have a view of the brokerage industry as a whole, especially with this whole NAR thing that everyone's just so tired of hearing about. But what is the state of the brokerage industry as a whole, in your opinion, and the agents that are operating inside of that ecosystem?
Oof. That's a whole separate podcast,
Well,
book,
you could come back for another hour. We could
encyclopedia.
talk about it.
Part two.
I mean, I'll tell you, from when I came into the business, it was kind of fundamentally a personal business, and it was not about the agent. It was about the client. And I've always felt that way. I haven't changed my focus. My company's focus has always been about my client, which is either the developer I'm working with, the buyer I'm representing, or the seller I'm representing. That shifted with the advent of social media, TV shows, et cetera, and it became about the real estate agent. They became the hero of the story. And that's a misaligned shift in fiduciary, in smart business, in my opinion, in kind of, the way the industry is perceived from the outside. We started out being considered used car salesmen. And I think now we're considered clowns in a circus who kind of make money easy and don't really care about much. And, we've given the industry, we've given the world good reason to feel that way about us, and they resent us. And it's been a couple of bad actors who've kind of disseminated that misperception of the market. So we're challenged with that daily. And you can see it all over the place. This huge lawsuit that the NAR lost, people hate brokers. They hate paying commissions. They don't see what the value is. And it's a daily struggle to validate your worth to your client. And if you focus on your client and you bring expertise and knowledge and value, I find that clients love you. But the general perception that needs to be combated against is this public persona of the real estate agent, which is not reality.
Yeah, got a bad image
Yeah, I
problem.
love it. I love it. And I want to, we're winding down. So I want to piggyback on that thought and just sort of wrap it up with, what are some of the, again, you've been in the business for so long, and your success is directly tied to your expertise and your connection to your clients and that one-on-one sort of advisory service that you provide. And I'm wondering, what are some of the tips you can talk about for success and production for new agents who are into this, who are just getting started, want to up their game?
Very difficult industry to enter as a new agent today, I feel. Although there are some things that have made it easier, tools like, marketing tools, data that you guys provide. It's a lot easier to become educated nowadays because everything is transparent. Everyone has access to data and information. It's a lot easier to communicate to masses. I mean, the golden rule that I would follow as a young person coming in is the most important thing, and this is in any business, in any industry, is try and find a mentor that you aspire to be like, and that you can just be a sponge and learn how to do business the right way. And, I think mentorship is underrated. If you look at anyone who's incredibly successful, they've had a mentor or, someone that they've aspired to be or they've learned from. And I think that's critical to success and will shortcut your path to success. The second thing I kind of touched on a little bit earlier is find your niche. It's so funny. I was having a conversation. I was playing tennis on Sunday with a friend, and he told me, he knows this guy who all he does is string rackets for tennis players, and he's made a profession out of it. And he sent me this article on this guy, and, he came to this country, he had nothing, and he found his way into a tennis shop, and he's the number one racket stringer in the world. And all of the pro players use him, and he's got, he's made it an art. And, and I think whatever you do in life, and especially in real estate, because it is such a hyper local market, find your niche and know that better than anyone else, regardless of what it is, and make sure it resonates with you, and then go all in. Don't try and be all things to everyone. Don't try and be in every market. Don't try and just throw anything against the wall and see what sticks. Become an expert, find your niche, and be the best you can be. Be the best version of yourself, and get mentored while you're doing that.
I mean, I feel like getting up and running. That's how motivated. I mean, you got to be exceptional at who you are, and I love the whole find a team leader that you respect and join, get on that team and learn like a sponge.
Yeah, but listen, it's hard to be patient, especially when we're seeing, you do a deal, you make $1 million commission. Like, I want that. That wasn't that complicated. Well, it's more complicated than it appears to be. And if you put in the time and you put in the attention to detail and you spend, time with mentors, your patience will pay off. And ultimately, you become, great at what you do.
I think it's an incredible insight, and we've heard it from so many people. I think you almost exactly are in parallel with Bob Knackel. He said almost exactly the same thing, which is find your niche and stay to your niche. And I'm wondering, have you ever said no to a deal because it just was so far outside your sort of sphere of expertise?
Oh, I say no. I probably say no more than I say yes. And, I've read from so many people that I respect and admire in other industries. And, Cal Newport, I just read his book, Deep Work. And part of that book, and I highly recommend that book. And obviously, in podcasts, I'm always recommending books. It's more about what you say no to, because when you say no, you're basically saying yes to the things that you now will have time to say yes to. So know what you don't know and say no to those. Don't go out of your comfort zone in things you don't know about, unless you're going to become an expert in that and spend the time and effort in making that your niche. But one of my most liberating moments in my career was probably 15 years ago, when I just read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, which is another great read. And, he kind of spoke about the 80-20 rule. I fired a client, which is bizarre. Most people, but it freed up. So it was a client that was taking up 80% of my week, and I was never going to do a deal with this client. And I eventually freed up so much time. It was liberating, and it was great for my business.
I love it. Amazing. Thank you so much, Shaun, for sharing what has been an incredible 20 plus minutes of wisdom. I learned a lot from this today, and it's always, the way you speak, it's just very digestible, and it resonates and it educates. So thank you so much. John, any final questions? Or are you good?
I'm looking forward to having Shaun back for part 2.
Yeah.
Anytime. I'll say yes to that. And, to you
there
guys,
we go.
Same to you guys. You found your niche. I commend you both on that. You've been consistent. Consistency is key. It's not always easy. I'm sure you know all of this stuff, but just really hats off to you guys for doing this consistently at a high level. And the industry needs more of this. And
awesome.
I commend you guys for doing
this.
So thanks for having me on as a guest. It was great.
Thank you so much. This is Shaun Osher, founder of Core, monster producer extraordinaire. Thank you so much. That is John Walkup. I am Noah Rosenblatt. This has been Talking Manhattan, and we'll catch you guys next time. Cheers, everybody.